Mr. Adam Rosa, thank you for your message, and not a problem at all. I get it. My apologies. I get it. It's life. Life's hectic, particularly this time of year as we're sort of closing out at the year, heading into Christmas. So no apologies necessary. I did watch The Cost, and I watched it last night, and I've sort of ruminated on it a little bit today, and so I waited a bit until I contacted you about it and gave you my thoughts. Wow, wow. It's a very, very, very good piece of cinema. And I haven't really overly thought about or planned exactly what I was going to say. I just kind of just I've thought about it, but then I just sort of thought I'd jump on and leave you a message and just kind of ruminate and just sort of just leave you my thoughts in a raw kind of unplanned sort of way. It's a film that, look, firstly, what I will say is that I can definitely see that it's a film that is very much rooted in a tradition of this sort of rape revenge thriller film. So there's a particular genre of film mainly emerging in the early 1970s in the United States, sort of in the context of the Vietnam War, just after the Vietnam War. And I think immediately of The Last House on the Left, Straw Dogs, these films that are very much about character, generally a young female character gets raped and killed, and then either the family or the partner or people close to that person who was raped and killed seek vengeance on the perpetrators. And so you get that cathartic closure as an audience, aligned with the cathartic closure for the characters in that they violently and very graphically seek retribution and ultimately triumph at the end. And so you almost feel that sense of justice that the characters feel. And so there is, on the one hand, it's a film that does move into that territory a little bit. So it is, for me, very much part of that rape revenge history, that genre history. Obviously, it has a very close affiliation to Deliverance as well. Not only thematically, but the fact that you've got male violence, so male perpetrators on male victims in a rural outback exterior. And so visually and thematically, there's clear connections to Deliverance. Having said that, though, and so there's this really big history of these films. Having said that, though, I believe that this film deviates away from some of those well-worn tropes of those films in that genre. And one of the main ways that it does that is it doesn't brutally and graphically immerse you in the rape. And in these films, particularly Last House on the Left, you see the rape, you experience the rape, you actually are there, usually in close up with handheld camera. It's in close proximity to the character. You viscerally experience the rape, and it stays on the screen for a period of time. That is effective on the one hand. It sort of does really emphasize the gravity of what the characters are seeking retribution for, but it can move into gratuity. It can make these films much more exploitative. And what I found that Matt's film does is that it is about seeking vengeance and retribution for a rape, but it doesn't emphasize the rape visually. Now, yes, you see obviously Nicole's character, you see what happens, you see the sort of the moments before she's captured, you see the struggle in the van, you see all of that, but you don't actually experience the rape, the moment of rape and the moment of death alongside her. Now, it's not to say that that's the right or the wrong way to do it, but it is different. And I'm assuming, knowing that Matt's a very particular director and that a good director in that he does his research, and he almost certainly would have watched Last House on the Left and Straw Dogs and Deliverance, and he would have exposed himself to these films. He would definitely, I'm assuming, as a director, understand the genre that he's working in. I like that he moved away from that. And so the sheer power of this film is really in staying in the moment with the two characters seeking retribution. And so the rape is de-emphasized, and the response to the rape there's a lot more focus visually drawn to that. And so I like that there was a bit of a push away from that, moving it out of the gratuitous and really immersing you in the moment. I thought it was a very well-paced, and in fact, before I get into that, obviously the other films that it really reminded me of, obviously there's significant connections to Wolf Creek. I think it was the character of Brian, the one who obviously had the tragically ironic death at the end, which had to happen. And I'm so glad it happened in an ironic, perverse way, because it needed to happen, obviously, as a consequence of violence, that no matter what obviously the thematic underpinning of the film is, no matter what reason or justification you have for violence, that there's always consequence. And there's that morally ambiguous grey area between good and bad. And even if we're seeking violent retribution for, in our mind, just purposes, if we're seeking retribution for reasons that we believe are just and righteous, there's always consequence. And so that existential dilemma that Matt's really tapping into, obviously I'm assuming that's a very deliberate, intentional thing. And I think Brian had to die as soon as he kind of got caught up at the end in the death of forgive me, I can't remember the name of the character who was the perpetrator who they were torturing for most of the film. But his character, as soon as Brian got caught up in his death, obviously Brian was always going to die. And I like that if Brian had have got away, or it just wouldn't have worked. So I think Matt's writing there works perfectly and was a conclusion that had to happen. Just on the references really quickly, Deliverance, as I mentioned earlier, Wolf Creek there's definitely a lot of aesthetic affiliation to Wolf Creek. I think the character of Brian in many ways is kind of a bit of a Mick Taylor-esque character. I like that he's just kind of this happy-go-lucky larrikin sort of in the sticks and in the outback and in this sort of rural exterior, who almost exhibits the benign characteristics of Mick. You know, in Wolf Creek, Mick has this exterior, and it's obviously a persona that he's putting on as a very affable Aussie bloke. I kind of feel like the character of Brian is the good persona. He almost encapsulates that Mick persona that he puts on to lure his victims in. I'm not sure whether that was an intentional thing on Matt's part, whether or not he was looking at that affable side of Mick Taylor and using that as an inspiration, but I certainly got a lot of reference from that. And obviously Kesty running covered in blood, you know, along stretches of road in Wolf Creek. There's certain visual references in this film to that. And the other one that really stands out to me is Killing Ground by Damien Power from 2016. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but that is an extraordinary Australian film that is very, very, very similar to this one. And I'm assuming Matt's he probably knows Damien, and I'm assuming that he's probably been very much influenced by that. That was a film that was directly influenced by Deliverance in a very overt way. So there's a lot of sort of a lineage of cinema and lots of different, you know, Aussie films and American exploitation films that move into this rape revenge style genre. And obviously you have revenge films, and they're a different sort of genre. And you've got rape revenge films. And rape revenge films are a very particular type and sort of cinema. And this is very much part of that lineage. But Matt does it differently. And as I said, he de-emphasizes the actual rape. And he places all of the emphasis in immersing you into the space of the characters who are seeking retribution. And just quickly, in terms of pacing, I thought it was a very well-paced film. I like that there wasn't an exposition dump at the beginning of the film. A lot of these films, I think the director and the writers are anxious almost for the audience to kind of know everything that's going on immediately and kind of try and thrust you into that. And I thought that the way that the film started slowly and silently, and it was a bit of a slow burn, and there were puzzle pieces in terms of narrative that you had to put together. And it wasn't obviously difficult to put it together, but I like that Matt teased it out. He didn't kind of just throw you straight away into this exposition, with news stories, for example, or newspaper clippings, which is detailing exactly what happened to Nicole's character, or that you know exactly who these two characters are at the beginning. This is a slow reveal, and they're puzzle pieces that you do put together over time. And there is that exposition dump once they tie him up in that farm exterior. But that's an exposition dump that obviously is needed and is something that, within the context of the scene, is realistic, because that is how that scene would play out. And just on that, the dialogue was really well written, very, very well delivered. This is a very, very well acted film. There wasn't a moment where I thought, oh, that just doesn't ring true. That dialogue doesn't seem natural. That's not how anyone would speak in the real world. In a lot of these Aussie indies, particularly, and American indies, dialogue usually is poorly written and very poorly executed by actors. There's either too much, or it's wooden, or it's not written in a way that is natural. I love what Matt did. So I think that it was very well paced. It was beautifully shot. It was, obviously it's not a horror film. It's a thriller film with horror moments, but it's definitely a drama thriller film. But what I love is that it, again, tonally, it was beautifully structured, beautifully paced. It was very well shot. It was very, very well acted. And thematically, it really, really spoke to a lot of very deep existential questions that we all ask ourselves about violence. This notion of violence begets violence is something that is very pertinent in our world at the moment. This is a very timely film that I think Matt's made. This idea that we think about all the wars and the things that are going on around the world. And I know you and I have different thoughts on, we don't believe everything that the media tells us and writes. And I know that you and I completely agree on that. But we know that there are conflicts around the world, and there are lots of different things that are happening where there are violent acts that are being inflicted on people that are seemingly innocent. And it really does beg the question, when is violence justified? Is violence justified at all in any context? Is it just to inflict violence in the name of good, or is there really any situation where good and, I suppose, acting in a virtuous way can be associated with violent acts? And if we do act in a violent way and we seek violence for whatever reason, I think the point that the film's making, which again I mentioned at the beginning, is this idea that violence begets violence, that there's always a consequence to our actions, that nothing you do, regardless of whatever your motives is, nothing you do is going to be without consequence, good or bad. Which is why Brian's death again is so perfect. And I was applauding almost when I saw that, in a weird way, because he was a great character, but he had to die. So I'm just rambling. I loved it. Look, it probably was a little long, and I think, and this is probably was my only bugbear again with The Legend of Ben Hall. Legend of Ben Hall was a great film for what it is. I love Matt. I love what he does. I think he's a great director. I love his story. I love how passionate and hardworking he is. A very sort of, grassroots sort of filmmaker. He's kind of an everyday sort of Aussie filmmaker that always does it the hard way. I've got so much respect for Matt and what he does. But my bugbear with Legend of Ben Hall, and not to this same extent, but in this film, is probably just a bit long. I think for an effective thriller, drama kind of film with a bit of horror of this type, I would say between 80 and 100 minutes is probably enough. I think it was just a little bit too long. Probably that second third was a bit long, and I get that there needed to be a lot of exposition and there needed to be kind of that moral conundrum that Jordan's character goes through particularly. And you needed to kind of see that play out, and probably went a bit long, but that's really my only, I'm not even going to call it a criticism, just probably a personal preference, because some people prefer longer films and that's fine. So I think that's probably the only thing with Matt's filmmaking. I think they do drag a bit, but this is a great film, Adam. This is a really good film. I'm a little bit disappointed that I didn't get to see it at the cinema, and it just, obviously with my living situation, it just hasn't panned out. But I saw it, I watched it on my TV with really good surround sound, so I got at least a decent, obviously not cinematic quality, but I got a decent watch on a decent screen. And yeah, this film is really firing on all cylinders. So look, congratulations. Well done on your involvement as well. This is a really good one for you to put on your CV as EP. It's I'm not really on social media, as you know, so I'll start ramping that up a little bit more once we get into the farmhouse in Jan. So I'm not really seeing a lot of the press and what you're posting. I'm assuming you are posting stuff, but I had a quick look at, Rotten Tomatoes and some reviews, and it looks like the film's doing incredibly well, which is fair and definitely very well deserved. So well done. There's obviously a lot more to discuss in relation to this film, which let's save for a catch up. So look, I'll wait to hear back from you, and even before I come down in Jan, let's do a Zoom. We'll obviously catch up in Jan. We'll maybe go out for dinner or something when I come down, and I'll let you know some dates. But let's catch up on Zoom, because I really want to chat to you about this film. I've got a lot of questions about where it was shot, whether or not I'm on the right money in terms of Matt's influences. I feel like I am. And just kind of your own thoughts on sort of my reading of the film. But it made me think a lot. That's what good cinema does. It was brutal enough, I think, to sell the point, and it left me thinking about the film in the way that I'm assuming Matt intended. Really well done, Adam. All right, I'll look forward to hearing from you, and I'll let's catch up and have another or more of a chat about it. But yeah, I'll leave it there. It's been a long enough message, but I'll talk to you soon.